Hi friends, my name is Heather and welcome back to my channel. You might be noticing that my bookshelf is looking a little bit chaotic behind me, and that's because I have gone and pulled a lot of books for today's video. In today's video, we are going to be highlighting my favorite books across the genres that I typically read in. So thriller, mystery, horror, fantasy, romance, and literary fiction. I knew there was another one. So while you might not hear any sci-fi or nonfiction or classic picks, this go round, hopefully by the time I do this video in future years, I will have some picks as I am trying to integrate more of that into my reading. However, we do have a lot of books to talk about today. I've picked 2 to 3 books per genre to talk about just to kind of give you an idea of my favorites, what I typically gravitate towards, and we're gonna start with thrillers. Now, I love thrillers. I love being shocked. I typically read them very quickly. So the first book I want to talk about today is Final Girls by Riley Sager. Now, this one is not one of his most popular reads. When I talk to other people about Riley Sager books, they typically say that this is near the bottom of their list, but guys, this is one of my favorites. I really enjoyed this book. I read it during quarantine when we were all locked up. I read it out on my patio. I read it in one day. It kept me turning pages. The twist in this book genuinely shocked me, and I had a really good time. So this follows our main character, who is literally a final girl. She went on this getaway with some of her friends, and there was a massacre that happened, and she was the only one that got away. And she is struggling with some of her memories as she lives her life and can't really remember what happened that day, but she has a close circle of people that she is able to confide in, and she realizes that people who she loves might not be all that they seem to be. She connects with other final girls who have survived in these types of situations, kind of relies on them as support, and she is just thrown for a loop as she learns new discoveries along the way. Like I said, this book genuinely shocked me, and I had a great time reading it, and it is how my love for Riley Sager started. So I will always come back to this one as my favorite Riley Sager, but who knows what's going to happen in the future with his books. Another more recent one that has made its way to the top of my favorite thriller list is The Quiet Tenant by Clemence Machelan. This one is categorized more as literary thriller. So we are reading this story about a serial killer who targets women and tortures them and then unalives them, and it is all very, very sad. But the difference between this book and others that follow a very similar format is we are following the points of views of some of the women who are the closest to him in his life. So we have the point of view of his daughter, who has no idea what's going on. She just sees her dad as a father figure. We have the point of view of a woman that he, for whatever reason, has decided to keep alive and hold hostage. And we are also following the point of view of a girl that lives in the town who becomes romantically interested in the serial killer and again has no idea what's going on. This book was beautifully written, and it really highlights not glorifying serial killers, but instead focusing our attention on the victims and the people whose lives that these horrible people affect. And I had a really good time reading this one. It gave me very unsettling dreams. And who would I be if I did not mention this last one, Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Guys, my copy is so beat up. The spine is broken. I read this before I really was worried about taking care of my books, but this is definitely a classic, a modern classic of the genre. This one keeps you turning pages. You don't know what to expect. If you've read this book, then you know that your life and your reading changed the moment you got to the twist. We've got the cool girl monologue. We have got a book that literally keeps you turning pages. I'll always come back to this one as a recommendation in the thriller genre. Next up, let's talk fantasy. My one true love. If somebody told me you can only read in one genre for the rest of your life and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, it would be fantasy. So let's talk about my favorites there. So we're gonna start with the Throne of Glass series as a whole. My copy of Throne of Glass is at school, so I'm gonna hold up the finale, Kingdom of Ash, but really I'm talking about the whole series here. Throne of Glass, man. Sarah J. Maas takes you on an adventure that hijacks your very soul. You are following an assassin named Selena Sardathian, and she somehow makes it out of the mines, which is kind of where convicts go to die and live out the remainder of their life. She is selected to be the king's champion through a competition, but It is so much more than that. She kind of goes on her little assassin assignments for the king, but that is really just where the story starts. It takes off into this world of magic and fae, and you can't talk about this book without spoilers, but just know if you want a fantasy series that is going to capture your heart forever and for always, it is the Throne of Glass series. And by the time you make it to this book, you're gonna need tissues, you're gonna need a pillow to punch, you're gonna need a friend to hug, a cat to cuddle, whatever. It's going to take you on an emotional adventure. And because I am a fantasy girl and have been my whole entire life, who would I be if I did not talk about the Lord of the Rings series? So right here I have the Fellowship of the Ring, but again, I'm talking about the whole series here. I read The Hobbit with my 6th grade class, and that was the moment I realized I loved fantasy literature. My teacher made that experience such a fun time. We were allowed to write skits about the book and put them on for our class. We made up tunes to the songs, and it just spurred this love for Tolkien in my heart. Where would we be without hobbits and Gollum and second breakfast and taters and the mission for just one small little hobbit to put the ring into Mount Doom and save humanity as we know it? I don't think any of us would be in the same spot if these books didn't exist. I reread this book in the last couple of years, but I really need to get to The Two Towers and The Return of the King to just fill this void in my heart. And the last book that is going to top my fantasy favorites, at least at this moment in my life in March of 2024, is Mistborn, holding up the final empire, but with fantasy. I still am talking about the whole series here. This book follows Vin, who is very much a street urchin, and she lives in this world where the bad guy has won. Humanity is cursed forever. But this book is like, well, what happens if the bad guy won? We follow a very interesting hard magic system that deals with different metals, giving you different kinds of powers, and some people can use all of these metals, and Vin finds out that she is one of them. It's fascinating following the magic system, but not only that, I mean, this book has so many amazing side characters that you really get to know over the course of the series. It's got twists, adventures, heists, battles, really good fight scenes, and I say that as somebody that cannot follow fight scenes to save my life. I can follow Brandon Sanderson's fight scenes just fine. By the end of this first trilogy, your heart, okay, if I'm holding my heart in my hand, it just goes like this, and you are crushed, but you are cheering. And this book, this series, I felt a connection to the characters that I do not always get in epic fantasy, but I got it here, and this will forever be my #1 fantasy recommendation. Let's now transition into horror books, which for some reason I don't have. Even though I've bought these books, I don't know where they are right now. And we're gonna keep this a family affair today, because the first one that we're gonna talk about is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Horror is not something that I have always gravitated towards. It was kind of taboo in my house growing up. I come from a very Christian, very religious household, and I am still very Christian, very religious. However, I have learned to read with discretion, and I think that that is an important thing as you grow into adulthood. I did not read horror growing up, and so I have definitely discovered horror as an adult. One of my favorites is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This follows a family who has just moved into a new house, and behind their house, about a mile away, they find out that there's this pet cemetery where local children come and bury their pets who have passed. However, as this book goes on and some things that invoke grief in our main characters happen, we realize that not everything dead stays dead, and this book really examines the question of how do I let something go and the consequences of what happens if I don't let things go. It was beautifully written. I listened to it on audiobook, and I thought that the audiobook was fascinating, compelling, couldn't put it down, and I really enjoyed Pet Sematary. The second book I'm going to recommend here is by his son, Joe Hill, and that is Heart-Shaped Box. This is one of the books that got me back into reading. I never stopped reading, but it basically was one of those books that I read on my transition of young adult, middle grade books into reading books written for grown people, for adults. I will never forget my reading experience. I had just moved into my first apartment on my own, and I was asking some of my friends for book recommendations, and my best friend recommended Heart-Shaped Box, and he told me that I might have to put it in the freezer if it scared me too badly, and I'm going to tell you right now, I did that. So this book follows a kind of washed up rocker guy who is very into the occult, and he orders a haunted suit online, and this turns out to be the biggest mistake of his life. We have not only a very interesting main character in the rocker guy, but we also have the perspective of a female character that I highly appreciated and was not expecting when I picked this book up. It genuinely scared me. There's an image from this book, and if Brent's watching this, he knows what image I'm talking about because he made it on purpose to scare me. If I can find it on Facebook, I'll put it right here. It follows me around and it still haunts my dreams, and I read this book 10 years ago, so Heart-Shaped Box by Joe Hill is an excellent place to start in your horror journey if you're wanting to pick one up. Let's talk about mysteries now, and I am keeping mysteries and thrillers separate. Thrillers I read to turn the page and be scared and shocked. Mysteries I read because I like something a little bit calmer to try and solve along with the characters. So the first mystery book / series I'm going to talk about is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This book follows some older individuals who live in a retirement village in a quaint English countryside, and one of the activities they like to do together in their quaint little retirement village is meet on Thursdays and discuss cold cases, and they try and solve them together. They end up being able to put their skills to a greater use when an actual murder happens very close to home for them. So you get to know these characters, Elizabeth and Joyce and Ibrahim and Ron, as well as the local detectives and police and some of their family members, and they are the most charming group of individuals you will ever meet, and they are also so smart and cunning and wily, and you will fall in love with the Thursday Murder Club. But on top of it just being a really fun mystery series, it also deals with very heavy topics like aging and what to do when you don't have anybody as you're getting older, what to do about grief, what to do when you hit the age where you have to start letting people go. And this book makes me laugh, it makes me cry. Anything that this man writes, I'm gonna pick up. Another mystery book that I don't hear about that often is The Plot by Jean Hunt Corlitz. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I picked this book up on a whim at Barnes & Noble a couple of summers ago. It was in like the new releases section, but I hadn't really heard anybody talk about it, and I am so glad that I picked this book up. I will say it's a little bit slower to get started, and it's written a little bit more literary, again, than some of the other mysteries that I read. It really takes off. We are following an English professor who dreams of being a writer. One of his students, and I believe it's a summer program that his student is attending, is like, I have the best plot for a book, and when I publish this, I am going to make it. However, this student dies, and this professor, ever intrigued by the plot that this student was talking about, decides to steal the story and publish it, and this just starts off a string of events. And you will notice that the plot, as you go, refers to so many different things. The plot of this book, the plot of the book that our main character publishes, as well as other meanings for the word plot. You can kind of see, it kind of looks like we're looking up from a casket buried in the ground in a plot. I could not put this down once the story really picked up, and I highly recommend this one, and I would love to see more people talking about it. Let's talk literary fiction. The first one that I'm going to talk about is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Most people have either heard of or read this book, and it's pretty polarizing, I have come to find out, but I happened to love this one. This follows Sam and Sadie, who are friends that meet in childhood and reconnect in college and decide that they are going to develop a video game together. This becomes super successful, and we follow their life as they go from video game creators to video game company owners, but not only like the business trajectory of their life, but also their personal lives and how their lives kind of weave in and out of each other's orbits over the years. This book had me crying. This book had me laughing. This book had me angry. And I think that a good literary fiction is really going to take you on a roller coaster of emotions throughout the whole thing. But on top of that, some of the sections of this book were just written in such a compelling and unique way that I will never forget them. There is a chapter in here called The NPC, and if you have read it, you know. This book holds a very special place in my heart, and if you haven't given it a try, give it a try, because you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it, but you're not going to forget it. Another literary fiction book that I love is Carrie Soto is Back. I read this book in one day. It's also very special to me because it was given to me by my best friend for my birthday a few years ago, and it's a signed copy. We meet Carrie Soto in another one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's historical California celebrity books, Malibu Rising. And when we meet her in that book, I don't think there's a single person that walked away from that reading experience and was like, man, I like Carrie Soto and I want to read a whole book about her. And yet here we are, and here I am holding it up as one of my all-time favorites. This book is set basically in the 80s and 90s, and we follow Carrie Soto, who is a celebrity tennis player. She is vicious, she is cutthroat, she is ruthless, and she has no empathy, pretty much. She is just very much goal-oriented, and if you are keeping her from getting to her goal, then she does not have room for you in her life. But this book is a close examination on somebody who is so ruthless in their sport, basically how they do have emotions buried deep underneath all of that, the trials that it takes for you to be the best. But it is also a little bit of a love story, but even more than that, it is a story about fathers and daughters, and I thought that it was just lovely. I cried. Guys, you're gonna notice that most of the books that I've talked about today, like if they make me cry, they're probably gonna be a favorite. That's just who I am as a person. But I really enjoyed this reading experience. I thought Carrie Soto was a great character to study, and I also just thought that the book was beautifully, masterpiecefully written, if that's a word, I don't know. Last on my books featuring literary fiction, we have Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. Guys, I could also hold up A Man Called Ove. I could also hold up Beartown. I love Frederick Bachman, but this book in particular was my first book I read by Frederick Bachman, and it's got such an interesting, quirky premise. It is set in Sweden. We have some people touring an apartment. As they're touring the apartment, they find out that they are getting held hostage, and the hostage situation goes very, very wrong. But it's not really about that. It is about connections and the importance of connections in your life, and about how if you are a human being that does not connect to people, then are you really human at all? This book tugged at my heartstrings. This book made my inner monologue feel relevant and important and seen. And I have not read this since it came out, and I definitely feel a reread coming on soon. I just adore this book, and I feel like if a book were to personify me, I would want to pick a fantasy book, but I can't because it's this book. This is me in page form. I love it so much. This was also my first ever book of the month pick. And the last genre I'm going to talk about today is romance. To nobody's surprise, I am only going to talk about 2 romance authors, and you probably are going to be able to figure out who they are if you know me at all. So I do own this book, but I let my sister-in-law borrow it, and now I can't find it. So that's on me. But the first book is Emily Henry's People We Meet on Vacation. I think that my favorite romance trope is friends to lovers. This book is my favorite Emily Henry book. This book follows Poppy and Alex, who are very, very different from each other, but who are, or I should say, were best friends. They met in college, and Poppy has always wanted to be a travel journalist, and so she ropes Alex into traveling with her, starting pretty local, and then as her career develops over the years, she gets to take him on these big, sweeping, grand vacations. However, they have a falling out, don't talk for quite a while. Poppy is working for this big travel journalism place, and she decides to reach out to Alex for one more vacation. Maybe they can clear the air and patch things up in their friendship, or maybe this is going to be the closure that they both need to move on and leave their friendship behind. And because this is a romance book, you can imagine what happens on that vacation. This is about who we are as people and how we change and grow over time, but also about how your friends are the people that know you the best and the most, and they are the people that you can feel comfortable being yourself with. And I love this book to the very depth of my soul, and I will always sing its praises. I will shout its praises from the rooftops. I will say, even if you're not a romance reader, please read this book just so that you can get to know me. Thank you for writing this, Emily Henry. It was written probably for me. I mean, not really. It was written for millions of your readers, but we can just pretend that it was written just for me. Again, I talk about this next book at length on this channel, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. Most of you probably already know what it is. That's Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I love this book. I love this book. I love this book. This book is written for people who struggle with anxiety and intrusive thoughts, and I have never been more appreciative for a romance book in my life than I am of this one. I don't see how Abby Jimenez could top Yours Truly, but I'm going to give her every opportunity to with every book that she publishes in the future. So Just like I said, thank you to Emily Henry, thank you Abby Jimenez, Dr. Jacob Maddox feels all of us anxious people feel seen. All right, guys, we talked about a lot of books today. If any of these are favorites of yours, please let me know down below. And if not, please let me know what your favorites in each of these genres are, because I would love to know. And if I hadn't read them, I would love to check them out. If you like more videos like this, where I just kind of give you a rundown, genre-wise, book-wise, whatever, let me know. I could do my least favorite books in each genre if that's something that you're interested in. But I hope you have a great rest of the day wherever you are. And as always, I will see you in another video soon. Bye, guys.